LETTER the FIFTH of Life in Mexico. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Life in Mexico by Francis Calderon de la Barca. LETTER the FIFTH. Departure from Vera Cruz. Sandhills. Oriental scene. Manga de Clavo. General Santa Anna. Breakfast. Escort and diligence. Santa Fe. Puente Nacional. Bridge sketched by Mrs. Ward. Country in December. Don Miguel. First impressions. Fruit. Plan del Rio. German musicians. Sleeping captain. Approach to Jalapa. Appearance of the city. Cofre de Perote. Flowers. House and rock. Last view of Jalapa. Change of scenery. San Miguel de los Soldados. Perote. Striking scene before daybreak. Non-arrival of escort. Yankee coachman. Dispute. Departure. Company of lancers. Alcalde. Breakfast at La Ventilla. Pulque. Double escort. Crosses. Brigand-looking tavern keeper. Ojo de Agua. Arrival at Puebla. Dress of the peasants. Christmas Eve. In Nacimiento. Jalapa, 23rd December. Yesterday morning at 2 o'clock we rose by candlelight with the pleasant prospect of leaving Vera Cruz and of seeing Santa Anna. 2 boxes, called carriages, drawn by mules, were at the door to convey us to Manga de Clavo. Señor V o, C n, the commander of the Jason, and I, being encased in them, we set off half asleep. By the faint light we could just distinguish as we passed the gates, and the carriages ploughed their way along, nothing but sand, sand as far as the eye could reach, a few leagues of Arabian desert. At length we began to see symptoms of vegetation, occasional palm trees and flowers, and by the time we had reached a pretty Indian village, where we stopped to change mules, the light had broken, and we seemed to have been transported, as if by enchantment, from a desert to a garden. It was altogether a picturesque and striking scene, the huts composed of bamboo, and thatched with palm leaves, the Indian women with their long black hair standing at the doors with their half naked children, the mules rolling themselves on the ground according to their favourite fashion, snow white goats browsing amongst the palm trees, and the air so soft and balmy, the first fresh breath of morning, the dewdrops still glittering on the broad leaves of the banana and palm, and all around so silent, cool, and still. The huts, though poor, were clean; no windows, but a certain subdued light makes its way through the leafy canes. We procured some tumblers of new milk, and having changed mules, pursued our journey, now no longer through hills of sand, but across the country, through a wilderness of trees and flowers, the glowing productions of tierra caliente. We arrived about 5 at Manga de Clavo, after passing through leagues of natural garden, the property of Santa Anna. The house is pretty, slight looking, and kept in nice order. We were received by an aide de camp in uniform, and by several officers, and conducted to a large, cool, agreeable apartment, with little furniture, into which shortly entered the Señora de Santa Anna, tall, thin, and at that early hour of the morning dressed to receive us in clear white muslin, with white satin shoes, and with very splendid diamond earrings, brooch, and rings. She was very polite, and introduced her daughter, Guadalupe, a miniature of her mamma in features and custom. In a little while entered General Santa Anna himself, a gentlemanly, good-looking, quietly dressed, rather melancholy looking person, with one leg, apparently somewhat of an invalid, and to us the most interesting person in the group. He has a sallow complexion, fine dark eyes, soft and penetrating, and an interesting expression of face. Knowing nothing of his past history, one would have said a philosopher living in dignified retirement, one who had tried the world and found that all was vanity, one who had suffered ingratitude, and who, if he were ever persuaded to emerge from his retreat, would only do so, Cincinnatus style, to benefit his country. It is strange how frequently this expression of philosophic resignation, of placid sadness, is to be remarked on the countenances of the deepest, most ambitious, and most designing men. C n gave him a letter from the Queen, written under the supposition of his being still president, with which he seemed much pleased, but merely made the innocent observation, "How very well the Queen writes!" It was only now and then that the expression of his eye was startling, especially when he spoke of his leg, which is cut off below the knee. He speaks of it frequently, like Sir John Ramorny of his bloody hand, and when he gives an account of his wound, and alludes to the French on that day, his countenance assumes that air of bitterness which Ramorny's may have exhibited when speaking of Harry the Smith. Otherwise, he made himself very agreeable, spoke a great deal of the United States, and of the persons he had known there, and in his manners was quiet and gentlemanlike, and altogether a more polished hero than I had expected to see. To judge from the past, he will not long remain in his present state of inaction, besides having with him, according to Zavala, a principle of action for ever impelling him forward. En attendant, breakfast was announced. The Señora de Santa Anna led me in. C n was placed at the head of the table, I on his right, Santa Anna opposite, the Señora on my right. The breakfast was very handsome, consisting of innumerable Spanish dishes, meat and vegetables, fish and fowl, fruits and sweetmeats, all served in white and gold French porcelain, with coffee, wines, etc. After breakfast, the Señora, having dispatched an officer for her cigar case, which was gold with a diamond latch, offered me a cigar, which I having declined, she lighted her own, a little paper cigarito, and the gentleman followed her good example. We then proceeded to look at the outhouses and offices, at the general's favourite war horse, an old white charger, probably a sincerer philosopher than his master; at several game cocks kept with especial care, cock fighting being a favourite recreation of Santa Anna's, and at his litera, which is handsome and comfortable. There are no gardens, but as he observed, the whole country, which for 12 leagues square belongs to him, is a garden. The appearance of the family says little for the healthiness of the locale, and indeed its beauty and fertility will not compensate for its insalubrity. As we had but a few hours to spare, the General ordered round 2 carriages, both very handsome, and made in the United States, one of which conveyed him and C n, the Señora, and me. In the other were the little girl and the officers, in which order we proceeded across the country to the high road, where the diligence and servants, with our guide, Don Miguel S., were to overtake us. The diligence not having arrived, we got down and sat on a stone bench in front of an Indian cottage, where we talked, while the young lady amused herself by eating apples, and C n and the General remained moralizing in the carriage. Shortly after, and just as the sun was beginning to give us a specimen of his power, our lumbering escort of Mexican soldiers galloped up, orders having been given by the government that a fresh escort shall be stationed every 6 leagues, and announced the approach of the diligence. We were agreeably disappointed by the arrival of a handsome new coach, made in the United States, drawn by 10 good-looking mules, and driven by a smart Yankee coachman. Our party consisted of ourselves, Don Miguel, the captain of the Jason, and his first lieutenant, who accompany us to Mexico. The day was delightful, and every one apparently in good humour. We took leave of General Santa Anna, his lady and daughter, also of our hospitable entertainer, Señor V., got into the diligence, doors shut, all right, lash up the mules, and now for Mexico. Gradually, as in Dante's Commedia, after leaving purgatory, typified by Vera Cruz, we seemed to draw nearer to paradise. The road is difficult, as the approach to paradise ought to be, and the extraordinary jolts were sufficient to prevent us from being too much enraptured by the scenery, which increased in beauty as we advanced. At Santa Fe and Sopilote we changed horses, and at Tolomo, one of the sites of the Civil War, came to the end of Santa Anna's 12 leagues of property. We arrived at Puente Nacional, formerly Puente del Rey, celebrated as the scene of many an engagement during the Revolution, and by occupying which Victoria frequently prevented the passage of the Spanish troops, and that of the convoys of